And now it is my honor to introduce two people that are going to then be the MCs for the rest of the day for this panel. First is Under Sheriff Shannon Dicus. Shannon Dicus began his law enforcement career with the department as an Explorer Scout at age of 16, so just like 5 years ago then, I think. Shannon honorably served in the United States Army 101st Airborne Division as a military police officer from 1985 to 1988. I'm hearing some military love out there. And following his service, he worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a police officer in 1990. Shannon graduated from San Bernardino County Sheriff's Academy in 1991. Throughout his career, Shannon has held notable positions: Commander of the Intelligence Division, Captain of the Technical Services Division, Captain of Bureau of Administration, Deputy Chief of the Detentions and Corrections Bureau, and Assistant Sheriff of Support Service or Operations. Sheriff John McMahon promoted Shannon to Undersheriff in 2018. His duties include managing the department's annual budget, yay, recommending and reviewing proposed organizational changes with the sheriff. Shannon determines appropriate staffing levels and priorities and evaluates the objectives and effectiveness of all department divisions to ensure optimal success in crime prevention and enforcement efforts. Cal State University San Bernardino with a Master of Arts in Communications from Cal Baptist. He is also a graduate of the Senior Management Institute for Police in Boston, Massachusetts, and is a member of the Police Executive Research Forum and the California State Sheriff's Association. Please join me in welcoming Shannon Dicus to the stage. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Next, I want to introduce to you Mr. George Lamb. And George and I work a lot together, and we like to tease each other. But I'm going to be nice. I'm going to say really nice things about George today because we love to tease each other. So the Reverend George Lamb is the CEO of Millennium Man Consultants, LLC, founder and CEO of Millennium Man Ministries, and president and CEO of the Faith Advisory Council for Community Transformation, and American Evangelical Christian Church's Director of Communications and Development. He is a servant leader to community-based and nonprofit organizations, county and state government agencies serving the inland Southern California region, County of San Bernardino in the following ways. As a member of the Community Vital Signs Steering Committee, where George and I spend like half of our lives on the CVS committee, he serves as chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee, co-chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee, and is a member of the Strategic Plan Implementation, Education, Economic Development, and Nominations Select Subcommittees. He also serves on the San Bernardino County's Homeless Veterans Advisory Board and Task Force, in addition to membership on the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools Wellness Strategy Action Team, and is privileged to have received recent appointment to the First Five San Bernardino Advisory Board. He additionally has received recent appointments to the Inland Empire Fatherhood Coalition and San Bernardino County Gangs and Drugs Task Force. Please join me in welcoming Mr. George Lamb to the stage. And now I turn it over to these fine gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. See you all nice.
Shannon.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing? So they talk about a survey, right? Did any of you get tickets this morning before you came in here, before you start answering questions about cops? Okay, in that case, have at it. Have a good time with it. Please, if you would, please take time to do that survey. It's a lot of information that will feed back to us so we know how we're performing in our communities. There are other things about communication and how we communicate with our communities to really let them know how we're doing and why it is we do what we do. And that's really at the crux of the conversation that George and I are going to start out with all of our experts that are here in front of us today. And really, the conversation surrounds the collaboration between faith-based groups and law enforcement. And frankly, this has been happening for years and years, but we don't really do a very good job of letting the community know exactly where we are collaborating at, how we do that, and of course, we all know there's a lot of work to be done. It's certainly no secret that if you look at any headline, you'll see a law enforcement agency's lack of trust in the with the community and a number of things, and how do we address those? And really it is. It's a baseline communication and getting out there. I'm going to give some examples of things we do in the Sheriff's Department, and I want everybody to understand and express their opinions both in that survey, and you'll hear it on the panel today. We know we don't do everything right. So when I talk about myself, I do have a long career in law enforcement, but most recently, and I'm going to go back to the recession that all of us lived through in 2009, and I'm going to go back to a lot of justice change initiatives that were going on in the state. Law enforcement as a whole really was slow to react to those changes. Some of them were prison realignment. Frankly, we didn't know how these things were going to happen. A lot of people being released into our community, probation, jumping on board. But really, what it really personified is some problems that we've always had in society, but it really seemed to bring them to all of the forefronts. And a lot of them are things you all are dealing with. Quality of life issues. I would wager to say that when all of us drove here, depending on where you came from, you would see homelessness. You would realize that there are mental health issues in our community. And the biggest thing that we as law enforcement realized out of some of these different initiatives, drug abuse, there's no capacity. So when prison realignment occurred and a lot of these societal issues became more at the forefront, I mean, everybody went to the polls last night, and a lot of elected officials, their entire programs were based on a lot of these social initiatives and what works and what doesn't work and what they're here to do to fix them. So law enforcement as a whole, the impact really funnels down to law enforcement. Funnels down to not just contact in the streets with these individuals, but also into our jails. So we realize there's a lack of capacity. So who do you reach out to? You reach out to your partners. Faith-based organizations have the exact same mission that law enforcement organizations have. We just do it in different directions. And at the end of the day, if we're really honest with ourselves, that mission is specifically to help out our fellow man. And I know we could have a long debate on that law enforcement's missed the mark in many of those circumstances. And a lot of it, I'm going to go back to really being prepared to use data and other decision-making strategies to be able to reach out and kind of, number one, explain what we do, but also as we reach out and try to build this capacity, how do we give information? Because traditionally in law enforcement, we kept that information close to our chest. So when we talk about this, some of the things that we've made adjustments on in turn with this information and in partnering with faith-based groups are really allowing them access. Recidivism. You'll hear a different definition from any government entity you talk to about what that definition is. But for the purposes of this panel today, we're going to keep it simple. Do we see the same people in our communities coming in and out of jail? That's very, very simple on its face. Using the jail really as a microcosm of society and using it as a gauge to determine what we're doing in government. Is it working in keeping these people out in terms of our government programs and things that we're doing, and in terms of collaboration with both faith-based and community-based groups? If you look at the data that's in there and you realize there is some low-hanging fruit that if we collaborate, we can certainly make a difference to our fellow man. Let me talk about mental health in the first place. If you look at mental health and law enforcement as a whole, a lot of people don't know how to deal with that. Families that are dealing with those folks don't know how to deal with that. They end up being arrested and put in jail. I think every single one of us would agree that that is not the place for these people to be treated. And a lot of times when they're incarcerated, they decompensate. So when you look at faith-based organizations, their congregations have a lot of capacity within them. And that capacity is to really help out the community. So we're looking at innovative ideas where we can partner with a faith-based group, partner with behavioral health, partner with the DA's office, partner with the public defender, and point these people out before they get involved in the system into treatment facilities. The flip side of that is also when you're a faith-based organization and you're within the congregation, you're saying, well, that's great. We understand we're here to help our fellow man, but aren't our government resources to be used for those types of things? So there's this collaboration that deals with funding. Some of that collaboration can be positive and negative. A lot of the things that come to our community now come in the form of grants. By using that jail as that measuring piece and communicating that information to all of our collaborators, we can hold government agencies accountable. Is what we're doing in mental health in the community working? Is what we're doing when our folks are in jail and incarcerated working? Looking at our individual programs and trying to work them out. So when you talk about moving forward with faith-based organizations, it's really being, I hate to use the word transparency because it gets thrown around and it's pretty flagrantly, but really letting them know what's going on inside those jails and sharing that because they have the answers. From a communication standpoint, law enforcement, we believe we know what we need to do, but a lot of times we aren't exposed to the people in the community who are actually living in a different environment that we may not individually have been exposed to. And when I say individually, I'm talking about decision makers in the law enforcement organization. By collaborating with the faith-based organizations, we are going to get that feedback. What does the community feel? What are their experiences? Maybe it is socioeconomic. There's a number of things that are out there. And then in turn, if you understand mental health, a person that has a mental health issue gets involved in law and justice, they actually get held there for a long period of time while they determine what their competency is. So a person with a lower level crime that has a mental health issue may spend a lot longer period of time in there. So how do we do that? By collaborating, again, with our faith-based and community-based organizations to build this capacity that's missing. From a law enforcement perspective, one of the things that's missing to really change a person's life are what we call hooks. And in the past, Prop 47 came out, and a lot of drug crimes, possession of drugs, were all made misdemeanors. There used to be a hook, and the first hook for a first-time offender was you were arrested on a felony, you agreed to the court that you would participate in a drug rehabilitation program, and if you did so, then they would reduce it to a misdemeanor. So you're not affected in getting employment. There's a number of things. Well, that hook doesn't exist. So now that there's no capacity, these people are simply churning through the system. We need to build that capacity. Our faith-based organizations can help us do that, and maybe they give us the root cause about why these things are occurring in some of the communities. So it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about that survey and why hearing back from all of you is very important. Now, a lot of these things are the law enforcement perspective, and we're going to get into some of these issues in more of a much more micro level with the pastors and law enforcement professionals we have up here, and we'll moderate this, and we're going to give you a chance to ask us questions. But that's kind of the law enforcement side. There's a lot of capacity building that we've done internally, spent a lot of money and made a lot of investment, but now for you as the community, and certainly with our partners, both in the community, governmental partners, as well as our faith-based community, now we have the ability to give back information and feedback so that we can make good decisions. And we know there are many things that we can do. So when you answer those surveys today, or any of our panelists up here, they're going to give their individual perspectives. I can tell you from a law enforcement perspective, we have big shoulders. We know we don't always do it right. But the fact that we're here today is our willingness to make sure this partnership goes. And today is really a jump off for things that are in the future, and where we plan on going, particularly in San Bernardino County and Riverside counties, to really trying to affect change and keep our folks in the community and not in our jails. George?
Thank you, thank you. I want to be clear really quickly about what the intent of today's panel session and discussion actually is for you to hear from us about our recognition of a need to move some things forward differently, for you to give us input as to how you think that should happen. This is not necessarily a community engagement forum, but for all intents and purposes, what we can learn from your contribution by providing us with the information that's embedded in the survey is really going to help us with our implementation of the Community Vital Signs Transformation Plan. How many of you in here, by just a show of hands, is familiar with Community Vital Signs? It's about 40% of the room. And so what that means is that we at Community Vital Signs have to do a better job in using forums like this to articulate and communicate to you who we are and what our intentions are as they pertain to transforming the community across the board. One of the things that the history has been is that law enforcement and faith-based organizations have had this friction, this tension, a certain amount of adversarialism. Our intent by forming this panel and moving forward is to turn that adversarialism into advocacy so that we're supporting the things that they're endeavoring to do in the community, and in turn they're supplying us with resources and access to other supply that will enable us to do the things that we want to do, and wherever we find alignment, to make sure that we're moving down that pathway together. So it's really important that you give your attention to the survey, because there is an intentional purpose and direction for how you want to see us do things is what will come out of that. So can I get some agreement by a show of hands of those of you who are going to participate in the survey? No, I need more hands than that. If you are unable to access the survey link through your phone, there are tablets in the back and people who are willing to help you complete the process. I promise you it's a 5-minute or less process. There are about 20 questions. Most of them are easy to answer. There may be 2 or 3 questions that you really have to give some thought to, but at the end of the day, you're going to really be helping this effort, and I'd like for you to do that. One of the things that I also want to make sure that I'm sharing with you in my brief time is if I say MLK, what is your first initial thought? Well, I know that part. What in association with Martin Luther King would be your first connective thought? Civil rights. I have a dream, right? Well, I am no Martin Luther King by any stretch of the imagination, but I do have great expectations. And I believe that from the formulation of this committee and the input that it will be able to give to us, that we are going to be able to initiate proactive partnerships where people are actually putting work forward that has intentionality and purpose about producing something besides just conversation. If I were in church right now, I'd ask for an amen, and most of y'all would give me a amen. See, I know I'm in the right place. I know I'm in the right place. But with that in mind, understand that great expectations have to be introduced. People have to begin to communicate to each other what they think and feel so that when we find connectivity and commonality, then we can move forward and maybe actually achieve some things. And so with proactive partnerships, right, which is, I'm coining that phrase. I coined it when I was with you last year. I'm going to keep coining it until somebody else takes it and runs with it, and then I'll take credit for it. But proactive partnerships are actually people doing things. You want to be engaged in doing things, don't you? You want to contribute to the transformation that needs to occur in this county, don't you? Those of you who are not just county employees and are getting paid to do it, but are actually citizens and residents, you need to see this happen, don't you? Oh man, y'all gonna turn this into church, and I'm not trying to go there. I'm already in trouble with the conference host. So think about this. There are some similarities that law enforcement and faith-based organizations have. Most importantly, those similarities look like first response. When people are in crisis and have need, they either go to law enforcement or to the church, right? We know that. And so when we come to start beginning to explore what those commonalities are, then we recognize that there are better ways for us to identify with each other, and then consequently, as a result of those identifications, find ways to move towards the center of the bridge and then ultimately be able to go bidirectionally into the faith-based community, into the law enforcement community, and see effort actually emerging that is cooperative and proactive. The other thing that I want to share with you, because I got like 2 minutes left. Shannon took all of my time.
Sorry, George, I talk too much.
That's my good friend and co-chair of the Safety Committee for CVS. We're learning how to work well together. I have high esteem for him and great respect. Another thing is that we're public servants. In addition to being public servants, we're always or oftentimes misunderstood. I'm pausing for a moment of contemplation and acknowledgement. Media has a way of framing each of our identities very negatively. And oftentimes you only hear about law enforcement in media when some tragic event has occurred, a shooting of some type or whatever, and you really only hear about pastors and faith-based organizational leaders when they've fallen into some misappropriate or inappropriate activity. There's never really a constant lifting of all of the positive things that are being done on both sides of this bridge, and we want today to begin a discussion about revealing that positive and then actually kind of capitalizing on it so that we can build the momentum that you're going to produce by providing us with the energy via your input that we need so that we can move the effort forward. I want to thank you for allowing me some time to share, and then I'm going to turn our session over to our esteemed moderator, my good friend, Mr. Greg Devereaux. Love you, brother.
Thank you, sir. My name is Greg Devereaux. I'm the retired CEO of San Bernardino County. I've had the good fortune to work with a lot of the people at this table and to meet some new friends. Unfortunately, we have about 3 hours of conversation to put in less than a half hour, and this esteemed panel could talk for 3 days or 3 weeks about any of these subjects. So we're going to try to do this lightning round fashion, and I'll just throw it out to the panel. Somebody talk a little bit. Shannon mentioned that a lot of times the community doesn't know what's going on and what's happening. So somebody who wants to talk about some existing programs very quickly, just so we give them a flavor of what's currently going on.
Paul, could you talk about San Bernardino PD's efforts with faith-based organizations? And Lana, could you also maybe address information exchange? And
Ron raised his hand.
And Ron as well?
And
Thank
so
you.
he's moderating, so we're going to stand in support.
Gotcha.
I'm messing around. Hey, y'all know I'm in trouble, and I'm also kind of, never mind. Go ahead.
Who would you like to start? Am I good?
You raise your hand first, and then Paul will talk.
You
about
have the
what
mic.
he's asking.
First of all, I just want to tell you how grateful I am to be part of this event. The information is tremendous, and if we're going to make any changes, you really need to be in a room where you can hear new ideas and concepts being discussed so we can push some things forward. Probation typically has a history, at least within the last 30 years, of focusing on compliance. The court orders certain conditions a person needs to follow while they're on probation, and the probation officer makes sure those conditions are adhered to, or you end up being in violation and you return back to the court process. But there's a lot that gets missed in that effort. So recently, we had an experience where one of the judges came to us and said, hey, there's some 18 to 24-year-olds who are smoking dope and riding skateboards down the city hall area. We need to do something about that. So we found out most of those guys were on probation, and we put them into a specialized caseload. And as we got to know these guys a little better, we got to understand some of the challenges they were facing. Any of you who are parents who've raised that age group can know what a challenge that is, moving from that youth to early adulthood. One of the guys we talked to had a backpack full of important papers crammed in there with all the other trash that he had, including his birth certificate and social security card. So you can imagine just some of the challenges they're facing. We have really worked with those young men to get them back connected with their families, back connected with the community, and now we're working with one of the TMLA, our land management organization, to get them county jobs, to get them started basically on their adult career. And that has been quite a process just to go through that, to take a group of people who were really disenfranchised and disconnected, and to get them really reconnected with the community and moving forward. I'm going to tell you, we have multiple stories where that's happening in our county, and each one of those creates new ideas about how we can further reach into our communities and be effective. But one of the things I've learned is you can't do that alone. We have to do that together. A typical grant of probation is 36 months. After 36 months, we're done. And if they don't have it connected to the resources in that community, they're really going to miss out on an opportunity for long-term success. So that's just my thoughts on one of our
Lana,
programs.
you want to talk about what's going on in San Bernardino County?
1 minute.
Oh, Paul's
Yes.
going to go first.
Paul's got it.
I'll go first, thank you. Well, good morning, or good afternoon. In San Bernardino, we, several years ago, looking at how can we engage the youth prior to incidents, but also how do we identify after an incident has occurred, what is the underlying issue within the community or within the individuals themselves. So Operation Ceasefire is has a proven track record. We looked at it and we have now adopted Operation Ceasefire for the city of San Bernardino, but we are changing it. We call it the Violence Intervention Program because our city is different than Oakland. Our city is different than Richmond and are different than other places, so we have to adapt it to our city. But a big component involved in the VIP program is understanding our limitations. As a law enforcement officer, I have a way of doing things, but I don't have the same connection with the community that faith-based has. I also don't have the same opportunity to reach out and to interact at that lower level on a daily basis. So part of our program institutes in a relationship between our faith-based groups as well as those that have, and to use a term, clout within their neighborhoods. So that's where we're heading down the path on right now. So it's a program that is up and running. We are getting into the stage where we have a few grants that we're going to be looking at implementing into the community to pay, and we'll go along with that on another topic. So that's just a little side note of what's going on within the city of San Bernardino.
Thank you. Who's next? 1 minute, please.
The sheriff hosts information exchange, which includes nonprofits and community-based organizations as well as the faith-based community. And it truly is an exchange. We hold them at our headquarters in San Bernardino, and we also hold them up in the high desert so that everyone can be involved. And when I say there's a real exchange, the sheriff will explain what's going on in our world, and then we have a real free exchange with the community. And they tell us what they think we can be doing better, and how we can be more involved in the communities, and how we can affect change, positive change.
Thank you.
Actually, now we'd like to go to our pastor, starting with Pastor Beckley. Pastor, you've been doing this a long time. What's working? What's not working? What's your perspective?
Well, again, it's good to be here, and I'm excited about what this panel is discussing. In the city of San Bernardino, we are working very strategically with our churches to be very much proactive when it comes to the issues that are taking place in our city. I give you a history. A year and a half ago, we formed an organization called the San Bernardino Pastors United, which was a direct response to the chief of police calling about 50 pastors together to talk about how to collaborate and how we would work together to reduce crime and violence in the city. From that, our organization was formed to do what we feel as the church God has called us to do. One of the things you have to understand about most of us as pastors, when we're in a city, we don't just feel like we're there just to serve. We feel like we've been called there, and there is a responsibility we have in terms of that call, not just to do the spiritual side, but also to serve on the holistic side, body, soul, and spirit. And part of our concern was, how do we as a church effectively work with the police department and not compromise what we feel we have been called to do in terms of the gospel and preaching that word that we feel is transformative. And so San Bernardino Pastors United got together, and we decided that we would do what we do best, and that's go into our communities and address the needs of our communities with the resources that we have. So we have about 35 churches that come together on a weekly basis, and we meet. And quarterly, we plan what we call community outreach. We have a three-prong approach. We have community outreach, crisis intervention, and community engagement, civic engagement. So we are looking at, one, addressing our community directly through the resources that we have, through the community outreaches, being involved in the civic issues, going to the council meetings and those kinds of things, and school board meetings to make our presence known, to gain the knowledge that we need to be a collaborative effort in that, as well as in the crisis response. Because again, when we have crisis in our city, not only is it just our first responders that are there to do what they need to do to create safety, we're there to do the spiritual aspect, to give that comfort, to give that security, to give that presence that we are there for them as well and their families. And so with our community engagement, with our community outreach, we've done this for a year and a half. We've gone to all the major areas in our city that our police department has informed us are high crime areas, and we've hosted community outreaches. We've provided physical needs, food, clothes, shoes, everything that the families think they would need to help satisfy their physical need. We share a message that we're here for you. We use it as a platform also to bridge the gap between our community and law enforcement. We ask the police department to come, be on platform, greet the community, and talk to them about what we are doing collaboratively together. And so that seems to be working. That seems to be working well. I understand there's a lot of things that we need to do that can continue to bridge that gap because of the challenges that our community has with trust and with the perspective and perception they have regarding the police department. But I'm a firm believer about this, is that those of us who are in these positions that we get painted broad brushed by because of a few of us that don't act right. You know, preachers got a wonderful reputation when you think about it, because when somebody talks about preachers, it's not always the positive things that you think about. Because a few bad apples All of us get labeled there. Same thing with police officers. Few bad apples, we all get painted with the same brush. And I think both of us in our specific venues have a responsibility to promote what's going on in terms of the positive side. On the faith-based side, we do that with the San Bernardino Pastors United. And on my church side, we do that with Law Enforcement Sundays, inviting law enforcement officers to help us pass out Thanksgiving baskets and things like that.
So you guys recognize that we are not going to meet our objective this afternoon, right? You already know that, right? And so I'm going to need you guys to help contribute to the awareness of those panel members who are speaking that we have a limited amount of time, right? This is a round-robin, hot-button, pass the mic kind of thing. And so for the time that remains, I'm going to ask the panel members and you, the audience, to help us be sensitive to the time that remains, which is growing very narrow as we move forward. So if you could limit your commentary to a moment, please, so that all the other panel members can get a chance to share, we'd appreciate that.
Bishop Sykes, Riverside County, what's going on?
Well, I'll be brief. In Riverside, I have a great relationship with the local police department. That's something that I established a long time ago. I'm blessed to have the largest church in Moreno Valley, so I'm often in the community. But collectively as a group, we don't have an organization like the San Bernardino pastors has put together. And what Pastor Josh has shared, that's something that I'm going to take back to the Riverside, Moreno Valley, Riverside County community and see if we can do something like that. Right now, we have too many people trying to do it on their own, and we need to be strategic and come together and see how we can continue to interact with law enforcement and make sure that our community is being served properly.
Dr. Estevez, we've heard San Bernardino County, we've heard Riverside County. What's happening in Pomona and LA County?
Actually, I'm Rancho Cucamonga.
Oh, Rancho, I'm so sorry.
So
I'm so sorry. I was looking at history.
So those are both good places as well. We, I think, are centered like most churches on the community affairs, and we're very active. We actually represent the West End. For those of you who are familiar with Rancho Cucamonga, our church is located across from Red Hill Park. I think to say that there are concerns, there's so many concerns, but right now for our church, I think our greatest concerns center around mental health. And we have found that through the things that our community has gone through and our society as a whole, we found that it's been most impacting upon those who are already having mental challenges as well as those now finding themselves and discovering that they do. So we have invested in a clinic that has now been founded and doing very well called Able Counsel Mediation. With licensed psychologists, psychiatrists, and individuals to deal with those issues. And I'd like to last say that we have found it most interesting, and the need has been overwhelming with children, from elementary all the way to high school. It is not a wonder that the things are happening that are happening. I just hope that we realize that they are happening, and it's real close to happening to us if we don't make a change. And because it has happened in our country, it has happened to all of us.
Thank you, Doctor. JJ, tell us a little bit about what's going on in the high desert.
Well, the high desert in the community I come from, we have 4 correctional facilities with 2 more that are already approved. We've got some medical cannabis things that are coming into the city. So we've got lots of things to deal with. What we've been able to do in the last 2 years of being in this community is really realize there's 2 things. Everyone has a story, right? Even everyone in here, right? We all got a story of how we got here today. Some of it may have been a career choice, or some of it you may just stumble into. And we've also understand that everyone's broken to some capacity. And one of the things I always say is show me someone that isn't broken and I'll show you a liar. Because we're all broken to some capacity. So what we're trying to do in our community is just try to listen. We need to understand what's going on. Hear the story of those that are getting realigned or coming back into the community. We're trying to listen to them. We're trying to understand what's going on in their lives. What we're finding is a lot of single parents are trying to carry the load because the other parent or their spouse is in a correctional facility. So we're trying to help them with some of the integration back in. A lot of things we run into is very similar to military families where, you know, the family held down their own, and then when the individual's coming back out, it's a completely different world that they're coming back into. So we're trying to bring in some marriage counseling, some family counseling. We're trying to do some integration with some of the kids intervening in their situation and hopefully getting them in place by the time they're 18, that they would know what to do in life and also get placed in a good job, in a good place, maybe even a good trade. So that's where we're at in Adelanto, and we're trying to do what we can. I've said this to the mayor there, is we're not trying to be the best church in the city, but we are trying to be the best church for the city. So that's what we're trying to do.
JJ, thank you. Jerry Gutierrez has been a partner of mine. A lot of the justice change initiatives that hit Riverside County, he's been a great advisor to us in San Bernardino County. Jerry, could you kind of give your perspective on some of the topics we're talking about today?
Well, there's a lot of great topics, and thank you for having me. You know, it's very challenging, like I made mention earlier, with realignment in a lot of the programs that we're now trying to deliver at the local jail level, which in themselves aren't really designed for long-term therapeutic treatment, but we're making our best effort. In Riverside County, we're really using data-driven research to address and help the seriously mentally ill who are incarcerated. That is a big push that we are doing in our jail system in the county of Riverside, implementing therapeutic treatment, step-down programs, and also we're taking it to a point now where our seriously mentally ill, our mental health department clinicians are picking them up upon release and providing emergency housing, medication, even sometimes taking them to the first appointment. Because mental illness, like as mentioned earlier, it's a national issue and it's a state issue, and it's not going anywhere. And so we're just trying our best to address it while we have them incarcerated. Obviously, it's not the best place for the treatment while in jail, but we're going to give it our best shot while they're there.
Jerry, thank you. Kim, can you go ahead and take the mic, and could you talk to us a little bit about what San Bernardino County is doing in terms of probation and the partnership with faith-based organizations, and maybe just some of the programming? Touch on that, please.
Okay. Hi, Ms. Davis. San Bernardino County Probation, just to sum it up really quickly, has 3 regionally based day reporting centers for adult probationers under our AB 109 plan. The really unique thing, really not so unique, but the way that it was rolled out is they're co-located. So they include a full complement of mental health staff, workforce development, transitional assistance, under the guidance of Division Director Laura Davis, also on-site schools for people to be able to learn, to earn their high school diplomas, also to get vocational training and referrals to job training support and those things. Also a connection to the jails where you can be immediately referred to and incorporated into services in the day reporting center. So not to be long-winded, but if you go to sanbernardinocountyprobation.com, to our website, there are several videos that'll take you to our YouTube channel that'll give you various clients that have done testimonials about the benefits of those services. So just in a nutshell.
Kim, could you go ahead and pass the mic down to Darren Goodman? Darren is the chief of police and speaks on behalf of the sheriff, which Chino Hills is our contract city. So he deals with law enforcement officers, the line level law enforcement officers. Darren, can you kind of address for the group out here what you see in collaboration with faith-based organizations and what you see maybe a little bit more from what you're hearing from the line perspective?
Absolutely, thank you. Good evening, or good afternoon, I should say, and I'm happy to be here to talk about this. What I do is really try to listen. We go out and we try to make inroads with all areas of our community, and the faith-based community is one that has some pretty significant similarities to us in terms of their humanitarian efforts. Any one of these pastors will tell you their primary goal is to help people. And that's what we seek to do in law enforcement. We want to help people. We want to make people better. And one of the ways we do that is listening and trying to understand what their specific needs are. In the area of Chino Hills, it's a rather diverse community, somewhat affluent. But going out into the community and listening to people's needs helps us develop better strategies to meet those needs. So those are the things that we do. We collaborate with the different churches that are in the community, and we talk to them about how they're interacting with other community members. We have Asian churches, Filipino churches, We have a Muslim mosque that's in the county area that I just visited recently. And when I listen to some of their needs and concerns, what I'm finding is that they're all similar. But if we're not talking to each other or if we're not listening, then we're not able to provide them the service that they need and the improvement that's capable by collaboration.
Thank you. Well, now we're really going to move this session round robin. There are a number of topics that I asked the team members to prepare around, but in the interest of time, we're going to identify two, and they're polarizing topics, and I'm going to ask every member of the panel to give a comment, limited to a minute, and just pass the mic through so that everybody will get to contribute to these two aspects of the discussion that we're going to allow to kind of conclude our time with. First thing I want you to think about is race relations, implied bias, and cultural competency. And so if you can weigh in a thought relative to any one of those topic points or topic areas, we would like to hear what your experiences are, and as it pertains to moving this bridge toward faith-based and law enforcement partnering, right, as an effort. So think about that in that context, and let's move it through really quickly, please.
Well, those are pretty serious topics.
I know.
Well, let's first start with implicit bias. We all have a bias. Every one of us is biased. The first thing is to recognize that bias and understand it. And then the second thing, real quick, is don't try and change the history, understand the history. Because we cannot forget what has happened to an individual, both the community member and the officer. So take those, but understand your bias and work forward from there. That's the first steps that I believe from a law enforcement agency with especially our younger officers, is to have them understand the community by accepting the fact that we're all biased.
I want to stay on the same topic. It's a very difficult topic, explicit bias. No one wants to really talk about it because it primarily deals with racism or subtle racism, primarily the African-American community and police officers, or African-American community and white individuals who may not even realize that they are being biased. Implicit means that it normally comes from the subconscious, based on what we see on television, how an African-American male is portrayed in a movie, or based on an experience you had in the past, or based on what you witnessed while you were growing up in your own household, and it's in the subconscious. And implicit bias means that if me as an African-American male, I walk through the mall and there's a white individual, white female walking past me, she subconsciously pulls her purse closer to her because in the subconscious mind, I appear to be a threat. Where it is dangerous when it comes to policing the African-American community, when an African-American male is pulled over by a police officer, a white police officer, there may be a subtle bias there that this individual appears to be large, appears to be unkept, therefore this individual poses a threat to me. There's no real way to really define it to the point that how do you address it, but it's real, something we have to talk about, but it makes us feel uncomfortable. And even within the African-American community, there's different biases. Surveys have been done and studies have been done that a light-skinned African-American will be treated better than a dark-skinned African-American. And those type of things, it makes us all feel uncomfortable. But if we're really going to deal with training, we need to understand that this exists, and we have to come to the table without pointing fingers at one another to say, you know, this is where I live. This is how I feel. I personally get upset when people, I'm 57 years old, I've lived my life and living my life, and I'm upset when people look at me as a threat instead of looking at me as a human being. So I really think that's something we have to drill down deeper. We're not going to solve it now, but it's something we have to throw out there so we're not afraid to come together as individuals and in a diverse setting and talk about it, even though it will make us all feel uncomfortable.
Now, I'd like to ask Jerry, as a Spanish-speaking individual of Spanish heritage and a law enforcement person, right? What have your experiences been?
Well, I think the key thing in talking about bias is, like you made mention, the important thing is that we talk about it. And that's the key thing. As an Hispanic, obviously, you know, for me, it hasn't been too much, to be honest with you, but it exists, and we know that it exists. And the key thing is talking about it. And I think one of the biases that I wanted to talk about, actually, when we're talking about law enforcement and talking about the community, is on both sides, we need to stop and realize we're part of the same community. Law enforcement is just much a part of the community and representation of the community as you are. And I think when we both acknowledge that and work together and talk things through, we can move this thing forward in a positive direction. And that's the key thing. The us versus them type thing it needs to be long gone. And that's one thing I really wanted to hit home on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment with respect to any one of those things? Nobody's spoken to cultural competency as it pertains to training, education, enhancing whatever existing programs may be in play. You have the mic. You want to start?
Yeah, I'll touch on that briefly. I want to share something that's sort of a spinoff of what Pastor Sykes said. You know, when you're talking about the historical issues with race as it relates to African Americans in law enforcement, I think I have a unique perspective as an African American male who's also in law enforcement. And, you know, I don't get to change my skin, but I can change my uniform. So I understand both sides of the issue very well. But what I will say is it's two-sided. As much as what he said is true about the bias that comes, the implicit bias that can come from police based on experience. And these things are true. You know, your experiences can frame your reality. So if a law enforcement officer has been in the business for 15, 20 years, and his experiences have been such that when he encounters certain individuals, he has more of a problem in some communities than he does in others, then that's an experience that's real. And it does frame a potential bias. But conversely, when you're talking about people in certain communities, like the one I grew up in, like the one some of the members on the panel grew up in, as an African-American child, you're taught, I can remember growing up being told, come in before the street lights come on because of the police. Mm-hmm. So if that's ingrained in you as a child, that also frames a bias. And so when we're talking about education and cultural competency, you know, it goes both ways. The community, parents have to start teaching their children to not fear the police, but understand what the police's jobs are so that there can be mutual respect and understanding. At the same time, the police need to take the time and extend themselves to understand and learn the community so they can understand where they're coming from and what their needs are. And that's the only way to bridge that gap. It's not one side or the other. It's a mutual issue. And in order for there to ever be any strides, you know, there has to be that understanding.
Thank you. Great response. I want to shift the conversation just ever so slightly, still under the context of cultural competency and implied bias, but I want to also ask Lana and Dr. Estes if you can talk about that as it pertains to mental health services, right? And not necessarily ethnicity, but as a mental health services professional, Dr. Estes, I know that you have encountered people who have been suffering from biases that don't allow them to connect to resources, don't allow them to connect to the normal things that the average person would be. And even in the church, how those folks who are challenged in areas of mental health are actually treated. So let's flip the coin and talk about it that way as well.
Well, it's very interesting you would ask that, because when you deal with culture, you'll find that needs of people are needs of people. Black, brown, white, red, yellow, it really doesn't matter. You know, and when people have biases against people, it's really one of the most uninformed, which is a very polite way of saying ignorant, dispositions you could ever have. What we have focused on mostly, and what I've decided to spend I like to call the beginning of the third quarter, though I might be closer to the fourth quarter of life, is in empowering people. And one of the things that we found in dealing with mental health, everyone loves to be empowered, everyone in this room. So we focused on economical empowerment, how to, and when we say economics, we're not just referring to finances, but the balance of life. Wherever one needs to be empowered is where one needs to be empowered. And this is a very common, it's a very simple thing to identify through mental illness all the way through, if you would like to call, she gave us an extension, but we're going to wrap it. I don't know if that's feedback or if that's my time to stop.
Actually, our timekeeper was telling me, you need to be paying attention to me right now and not just the conversation. And so we appreciate the commentary. We still have a few minutes remaining, and so I do want you to share, and then we'll touch one other topic really quickly, take a few questions, and then we need to wrap our session.
Well, certainly a greater number of our population is suffering from mental illness. And I think you said it earlier and very eloquently that we have to take a holistic approach to how we deal with individuals. And the faith-based groups have done that for a very long time. And now in law enforcement, we have to make that change. And we have a great deal of programs within our facilities, and then we're finding ways to pass those folks off once they get released to those services that are out in the community instead of just turning them out on the street. We try to identify them within our correctional facilities and then put a plan together, and we don't just release them to the streets when we know that they have issues that they can't necessarily take care of themselves. But we have to deal with the whole person, and we can no longer just deal with the conduct.
Okay, thank you. Last topic, 3 people, 1 minute, and then we're going to take 2 or 3 questions from the audience and wrap. I want you to encourage us, right, to move forward with this discussion in a much larger context with the appropriate amount of time that's actually dedicated for it. And then when that actually happens, we will send out via this vehicle of reach out a way for you to connect back to us and potentially contribute to the discussion as it moves forward. If Ron Miller, Deputy Chief Probation, Riverside, if you could talk 1 minute about the impacts of prison realignment as you observe them from your perspective in your department.
I think the thing to remember is that these are citizens from our county. These are individuals who went to a state facility and then came back. Prior to AB 109, they were supervised by parole, and under AB 109, they were supervised by county employees or county probation. And I think that there was an opportunity in there to start working collaboratively with county partners in a way that never happened before. So I think that while you hear always the challenges about AB 109, I think there have been some tremendous opportunities in the dialogue that's occurred, the relationships that have been developed. I will tell you that in our county we work with parole, that we're dealing with the same population, to try to make sure that those individuals are coming back into the community and that there's a warm handoff between prison and the county and help them get back on their feet. If you don't do that, the stressors and challenges they're facing, they unfortunately will then go back to some previous decisions that led them into criminal justice in the first place. And so I think there have been some tremendous opportunities under AB 109 for us to be more effective.
I'm going to ask our San Bernardino counterpart, Deputy Chief Kim Epps from San Bernardino County Probation, to add a comment, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Devereaux if you will just wrap us with your comments, please.
I think at the end of the day, because people return to supervision in local levels, we've had better coordination of services. We know better what you need. It's been more timely because we were able to get funding and share that with partners. Not only did it fund probation departments for our county, but also money goes to our local law enforcement under AB 109, Sheriff's Department, Public Health, the Department of Behavioral Health, TAD, other partners. So we're better able to link people with social services that they may not have had access to, specifically medical care. access to better educational resources that helps them in their transition to post-release. We're better able to deal with some of those issues in a more timely manner because we see you sooner. And we've always had dual supervision cases that were on parole or on probation, but now that you've fully given us the bodies of that population, so to speak, I believe the services are better and, as I said, more timely, better coordinated, and more beneficial to the local community because we have a local investment along with all of our partners, and we're able to deal with those issues in your home base and also have a long-term impact in the family. Is it perfect? No, but it is working for what we're doing at our local level.
Thank you. Ms. Devereaux.
Pastor Lamb referred to Martin Luther King, Dr. King, and his dream. A very great lady, Dr. Marion Wright Edelman, said, too many people, she's the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, too many people are waiting for Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi to return. They're gone. It is up to us. It is up to you. Everyone at this table has committed to making progress in the kind of proactive partnership that Pastor Lamb talked about, and we ask that you all join us. Thank you so much for your time.